I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an idea for which I am prepared to die.
Goedemiddag allemaal, dames en heren. Voordat ik met de eigenlijke toespraak begin, zou ik eigenlijk even iets anders tegen u willen zeggen. Ik kan u niet goed zien door de harde lichten, maar ik weet dat u er bent en wat fijn dat u weer in het theater bent. Ook al nog niet met allemaal, maar het lijkt me toch ook een moment om even uit te spreken hoe dankbaar wij zijn voor onze acteurs, regisseurs, dansers, sprekers, die we zo meteen weer kunnen gaan bewonderen en belonen, hopelijk met groot applaus, ovaties. En dat mag ook wel, na 2 jaar, en niet alleen zij, maar ook technici, grimeurs, decorbouwers, alle andere mensen die normaal in de theaters werken, hebben het zo moeilijk gehad. Ze hebben het zwaar gehad. Oh, geeft u me nog even. Ik wou u zo om applaus vragen, maar blijkbaar kunt u er niet mee wachten. Want ik wou er nog aan toevoegen, het is dankzij hun veerkracht, professionaliteit en liefde voor het vak dat zometeen kunst en cultuur weer hun plek in kunnen nemen in het hart van onze samenleving. Waar het thuis hoort en waar het zo vaak verwaarloosd is de afgelopen 2 jaar. Nogmaals applaus. Goed, dames en heren. Amsterdam is niet de navel van de wereld, maar een venster op de wereld. Dat waren de woorden waarmee Ed van Tijn het programma van Amsterdam Culturele Hoofdstad in 1987 opende. En Ed van Tijn was daar trots op. Maar het echte hoogtepunt van zijn burgemeesterschap, dat was natuurlijk het bezoek van Nelson Mandela in 1990. En dat was ook een hoogtepunt voor onze stad. En niet omdat de Amsterdammers zo trots konden zijn op een stad zonder racisme. Nog maar enkele jaren daarvoor was de 15-jarige Antilliaanse Kerwin Duinmeijer door een skinhead en onder begeleiding van racistische leuzen vermoord. Hier vlakbij op de Dam, in het hart van onze stad. En de keeper van Ajax werd stevast begroet met oerwoudgeluiden. De aanhang van extreemrechtse partijen groeide en zeker nu groeit gestaag. Zelfgenoegzaamheid was niet op zijn plaats en is nu helemaal niet op zijn plaats. Ed van Tijn wist dat zelf ook maar al te goed. Want het bestrijden van racisme en discriminatie was altijd zijn belangrijkste drijfveer. Als burgemeester was hij dan ook een bijna activistische bondgenoot van de anti-apartheidsbeweging. Het bezoek van Nelson Mandela was een hoogtepunt in de geschiedenis van Amsterdam. Omdat het zo'n hoopvol moment was. De hoop dat vrijheid, gelijkheid en rechtvaardigheid voor iedereen bereikbaar zou worden. En die hoop stond op een junidag van 1990 op het balkon van deze stad Schouwburg, toegejuicht door duizenden mensen. En die hoop behoort tot de kern van de nalatenschap van Mandela. En in zijn geest maakte de zeer begaafde kunstenaar Moha Modikazeng, die ook vandaag volgens mij zijn bijdrage weer levert, het Nelson Mandela gedenkteken. En meteen na de feestelijke onthulling in het Mandela Park sloten de bewoners van Amsterdam Zuidoost dat kunstwerk in hun hart. En voor mij staat dat beeld voor het zelfbewustzijn van een nieuwe generatie Amsterdammers. Een generatie die in hun wijken, en niet alleen in hun wijken, maar in de hele stad het heft in handen neemt. Die racisme en discriminatie niet meer accepteert. En een nieuwe culturele wind door onze stad blaast. En ook daarom is het zo belangrijk dat naast kunstwerken in de openbare ruimte ook de podiumkunsten weer mogelijkheden hebben. Al hoort het hier natuurlijk eigenlijk nu wel helemaal vol te zitten. Het is niet toevallig dat we juist met kunst en cultuur het gedachtegoed van Nelson Mandela levend houden. Hij zei zelf: ik spreek van cultuur en creativiteit, want die zijn, net als de waarheid, blijvend. Waarheid heeft kunst en cultuur nodig. Waarheid kan niet zonder schoonheid, maar zeker ook niet zonder de schurende verhalen die op een podium als deze verteld worden. Met poëzie, dans en muziek kunnen wij vertellen wie we zijn, zonder onszelf of anderen een etiket op te plakken. Dat bewees ook wel de vorige editie van de Nelson Mandela-lezing, 2 jaar geleden, helaas onderbroken door corona. Door de verrassende combinatie van optredens won de lezing van Elnathan John aan kracht en raakte, dat herinner ik me namelijk nog heel erg goed, de poëtische voordracht van Adriaan van Dis ons alle diep. En met de derde Nelson Mandela-lezing ontstaat bijna een nieuwe traditie. Een jaarlijkse manifestatie van betrokken kunstenaars die zich verbonden voelen met de erfenis van Mandela. Met de toekomst van het Afrikaanse continent en mensen van Afrikaanse wortels waar zij ook wonen. Dat past bij onze stad. Door de historische verantwoordelijkheid die onze stad draagt voor handel in slaafgemaakte mensen en kolonialisme. Maar ook door onze band met de anti-apartheidsbeweging. Maar het past vooral ook zo goed bij Amsterdam, omdat het onze stad helpt te worden wat wij zo graag willen zijn. Een venster op de wereld. Dank u wel en veel plezier en wijsheid vandaag. Dank u wel.
Meneer Fontijn, hoe hebt u deze manifestatie ervaren?
Nou, er was een enorme opkomst. De optocht hier naartoe was hartverwarmend. Het was geweldig om je blijdschap zo met anderen samen te kunnen beleven in de straten van Amsterdam.
Vindt u de tijd rijp om sancties en boycottmaatregelen af te schaffen?
Ik vind vandaag de tijd rijp om feest te vieren. En morgen zullen we de balans moeten opmaken en uiteraard eerst moeten bezien wat Mandela van ons verwacht en wat de opstelling zal zijn van de Nederlandse regering. Ten slotte wij als gemeente niet het voortouw.
Today, the government agrees that apartheid is one of the gravest mistakes that white South Africa has ever committed.
Een droom. Een jongensdroom die uitkwam?
Een volwassene droom. Ja, dat is het mooiste wat je je kunt voorstellen.
Ja, een man die natuurlijk op zeer veel terreinen zeer uitgesproken is geweest. In de strijd tegen de apartheid, in de solidariteitsbewegingen met strijd elders in de wereld, in het verheffen van zijn stem tegen het AIDS-beleid in Zuid-Afrika.
Bart Luijrink was 20 jaar correspondent in Zuid-Afrika. Voor een boek over homoseksualiteit interviewde hij de bisschop.
Het valt me op dat zij die haat prediken vooral wonen in landen waar honger, armoede, oorlogen, corruptie en onderdrukking aan de orde van de dag zijn. Hij zei, ja, ik heb natuurlijk net als zoveel mensen in mijn kerk jarenlang gedacht, je mag het wel zijn, maar je mag het niet doen. En hij zei, ja, maar dat is net alsof je tegen een vogel zegt, je mag wel een vogel zijn, maar je mag niet vliegen. En dat was natuurlijk een prachtige uitspraak.
Connie Braam was tientallen jaren actief in de anti-apartheidsbeweging. Toen alle leiders in Zuid-Afrika vastzaten, gaf hij de onderdrukte zwarte bevolking een stem.
Dat ging over generatie na generatie na generatie. Dat jonge mensen onderwijs, goed onderwijs werd ontzegd. Iedere vorm van ontwikkeling werd de kop ingedrukt. Dus het ging veel verder dan alleen maar mensen op straat arresteren en in gevangenissen gooien. Nee, het was een totale ontzegging van menswaardigheid. En daar kwam ik tegen op.
Our leader has come out, or is coming out tomorrow. And hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah,
Als je niet gaat stemmen, zeg het dan zo zachtjes, dat Nelson Mandela het niet kan horen, laat hem met eeuwige rust. Als je niet gaat stemmen, wees dan zo discreet dat onze voorouders zich niet roeren in hun graf. Als je niet je stem, laat 1919 het niet horen. Laat Suze Groeneweg, laat Wilhelmina Drucker met rust. Als je niet gaat stemmen, laat het bloed op de stenen in de straten van Selma Montgomery het niet horen. Laat Martin Luther King niet ter oren komen als je niet je stem, laat hem niet weten dat je kiest om te zwijgen. Als je geen droom hebt, niets om je hart voor te maken, niemand om voor op te staan, niets om voor te vechten, laat het niet weten aan hen die niet anders kunnen. Laat het de dag niet weten, laat het de nacht niet horen, wees zo discreet dat zelfs je schaduw het niet weet. Laat het zand van Soweto met rust. Steve Biko, hij mag het niet horen. Sojourner Truth mag het niet weten. Kerwin Duinmeijer, Tamir Rice, Marielle Franco, laat het niet horen en wees stil in Ferguson en Baltimore. In Damascus en Darfur, in Chili, Hongkong en in Amsterdam. En onder geen beding laat het de mannen achter de tralies van de statistiek het weten. Daar waar de stembiljetten niet worden bezorgd, mogen ze het niet horen. Daar waar ze de stemlokalen nooit zullen bereiken. Door de bommen en de kogels en de afstand en de armoe en de dictator en het geloof en de kleur en de klasse. Daar mogen ze het niet weten. Laat Nelson Mandela niet weten dat je liever stil blijft. Laat hem niet weten dat je kiest om te zwijgen. Als je geen droom hebt, niets om voor op te staan, niemand om voor te vechten, niets om je hart voor te maken, laat het niet weten aan hen die niet anders kunnen. Want als je niet gaat stemmen, wees dan alsjeblieft zo zachtjes dat Nelson Mandela het niet kan horen. Als je niet gaat stemmen, laat Nelson Mandela. Als je niet gaat stemmen, laat Nelson Mandela. Als je niet gaat stemmen, laat Nelson Mandela. Laat Nelson Mandela. Laat Nelson Mandela niet horen dat je kiest om te zwijgen.
Goedemiddag, geachte aanwezigen. De cel is een ideale plaats om jezelf te leren kennen, schreef Nelson Mandela in Conversations with Myself. 28 jaar achter de tralies hadden zijn horizon indrukwekkend verbreed. The change of the body are often wings to the spirit. Een citaat uit een gevangenisbrief aan zijn vrouw Winnie. Elke dag mediteren en lang in een verweerde spiegel kijken. Probaat middel tegen de ijdelheid en een manier om jezelf te doorgronden. Ook las hij veel biografieën van politici in de gevangenis. Niet om zich te spiegelen aan mensen die hij bewonderde, dat ook, maar vooral om zijn tegenstanders te doorgronden. In een filmpje voor de ZAM-site vertelde ik een maand of wat geleden hoe Nelson Mandela in zijn cel tientallen boeken over de boerenoorlog las. De strijd van de Afrikaners tegen de Britse overheersing aan de Kaap, eind 19e, begin 20e eeuw. En die kennis kwam hem goed van pas toen hij in de laatste maanden van zijn gevangenisstraf aftastende gesprekken voerde met de top van de Nationale Partij, die Zuid-Afrika met zijn apartheidspolitiek in zijn greep hield. Zo kon hij zijn onderhandelaars, allemaal Afrikaners, op hun eigen vrijheidsoorlog wijzen. Hij sprak met bewondering over die dappere boeren van weleer. Wij vechten dezelfde strijd, zei hij tegen staatspresident P.W. Botha. Een gewapende strijd tegen de onderdrukker, zelfde tactiek. En dat bracht Botha, een hork van je welste, die niet voor niets die groot krokodil werd genoemd, dadig in verlegenheid. Zo wist Mandela ook het witte personeel van het presidentieel paleis voor zich te winnen. Deze trouwe knechten van de heersende klasse, meelopers, gevangen in hun vooroordelen, waren hun doos al aan het pakken toen Mandela voor het eerst de burelen van de macht in Kaapstad betrad. Hij riep alle medewerkers bijeen en daar stonden ze met gebogen hoofd, klaar voor ontslag. Maar Mandela zei, blijf. Nog minstens 5 jaar. We hebben jullie nodig. Deel jullie kennis met ons. Jullie toegang tot systemen en archieven. Niks afrekenen, geen tribunalen, maar een uitgestoken hand. Mandela handelde niet zozeer uit medemenselijkheid, maar uit intelligent eigenbelang. Die Afrikaner-bureaucraten zaten opgesloten in een wit en angstig denken. In ontkenning vooral en in een hardnekkig geloof in de eigen mythe van heilbrengers in donker Afrika. Zuiver racisme, maar ze wisten er voor zichzelf een mooi verhaal van te maken. Ook het oude witte Europa worstelt met een angstig denken. Het klampt zich vast aan een toekomst die in het verleden ligt, met gesloten grenzen en glorieuze nazistaten. Het ontkent de realiteit dat de nu als minderheden weggezette bevolkingsgroepen straks een meerderheid zullen vormen. In het jaar 2050 zal de helft van de Europeanen een migratieachtergrond hebben. Nederland telt dan meer mensen van kleur dan mensen met een witte huid. In Amsterdam heeft nu al 35% van de scholen een leerlingpopulatie waarvan meer dan 70% gekleurd is. Niet meer dan 10% van de wereldbevolking is wit. De tijd dat dit geprivilegeerde smaldeel de lakens uitdeelt, is voorbij. De gekoloniseerden verheffen steeds meer een stem, geven hun visie op de Europese expansiedrift. Zij confronteren de oude machthebbers met andere ideeën over godsdienst, schoonheid en geschiedenis. Verhalen over onrecht en onderdrukking vinden hun weg naar academie, uitgeverijen, film en moderne media. Weggemoffelde getuigenissen over uitbuiting en vernedering worden breed gedeeld. Eeuwen onverteerde woede komt naar boven. Aboriginals, Maori's en Inuit keren zich tegen de landdieven. De Afro-Amerikanen laten met Black Lives Matter het zwarte bewustzijn over de hele wereld klinken. Andere ervaringen, andere inzichten. De witte wereld wordt de laatste decennia geconfronteerd met zijn eigen racistisch archief. De veroveringszucht blijkt in het westerse denken te zijn geslopen. In de talen, en verhalen? Waarom is zoveel negatiefs in onze beeldspraak verbonden aan de kleur zwart? Wit zelfonderzoek is geboden. Ik zit nu al 2 jaar in een leesclubje waarin we allerlei klassieken van zwarte denkers lezen. Te beginnen met Frantz Fanon, De Verworpene der Aarde. En daarna een van de eerste Afro-Amerikaanse mensenrechtenactivisten, William Du Bois. Die in 1903 baanbrekend denkwerk verrichtte met The Souls of Black Folk. Evenals onze volgende spreker, de hoofdspreker, Yvonne Owuor, kreeg hij een werkbeurs van de stad Berlijn. In 1893 bracht hij een bezoek aan Nederland dat hij beschreef als an extremely neat and well-ordered mud puddle. We lazen Anton de Kom, Gloria Wekker en het indrukwekkende alledaags racisme van Philomena Asset. En nog veel meer, ook Aziatische en Oosterse denkers. Je weet als oude witte man niet wat je leest, wat je overkomt. Mijn hele wereldbeeld wankelde van die honderden voorbeelden van eigengerechtigd racisme. En je kijkt in de spiegel, heb ik ook zo gedacht. Ben ik ook doordezemd met bevoogdend gedrag, zoon van een knilofficier. Waarom noem ik de Japanse inname van de kolonie Nederlands-Indië een bezetting? En de Nederlandse inname van die 17.508 eilanden in de archipel een aanwezigheid. De Indonesiërs noemen het gewoon 350 jaar bezetting. Landjepik. En met de Bijbel in de hand verdedigde expansiedrift die andere mensen en volken uitdunde. Die de natuur vernietigde. Die rijkdommen van andere volken stal en dat allemaal etaleerde als daden van beschaving en verheffing. En oh, wat hebben die oud-kolonialen heimwee als ze door hun oude fotoalbums bladeren. Er werd er ook veel groots verricht. Ja, tante Prul. Ja, oom Boy. De koloniale geschiedenis heeft ons getekend, zegt Yvonne Owuor. Maar het besef erdoor getekend te zijn is niet comfortabel. Moet ik dan het verleden van mijn deels gekleurde, of beter gezegd gemixte familie verloochenen? Woorden uit mijn romans gunnen? Hun door mij verwoorde denkbeelden van de sokkels trekken? Racistische boeken uit mijn kast gooien? We kunnen de geschiedenis toch niet herschrijven? Nee, maar ik kan wel leren mij te verplaatsen in de slaafgemaakte, de vermoorde en de vernederde, zonder mij die vernederingen toe te eigenen. Oh, wat ben ik woke. Hier spreekt een goed mens. Maar het gaat me niet om het willen deugen, om ijdel met de laatste modes mee te gaan. Ik lees die boeken om lenig van geest te blijven, om het te vernieuwen, om te leren, om geen vreemde in mijn eigen tijd te worden. Een geweldige tijd, vol botsende verandering. Het is eigenbelang. Al tijden neem ik als voyeur deel aan discussies over kleur en kolonie op het internet. Tot diep in het continent Afrika, tot ver in de Indonesische archipel, kan ik over de schouders van scribenten en denkers meelezen hoe over het oude witte Europa wordt geschreven en geoordeeld. Ik zei het al eerder, wat een geweldige tijd. Maar je wordt er niet vrolijk van. Wel wakker. Zonder radicaliteit geen verandering. Ik heb het hier al eerder gezegd en ik kan het niet genoeg herhalen. Wat ik al internettend ook ontwaar, is een hang naar slachtofferschap. Dat begrijp ik en spreek ik niet tegen. Schuld en schaamte passen Europa. Er lijken herstelbetalingen mij nog passender. Slachtoffers verdienen solidariteit en aandacht. Zeker waar het om slachtoffers van misdaden tegen de menselijkheid gaat. Misschien roept al die aandacht ook jaloezie op. Want het is opvallend hoezeer de hang naar leed en erkenning het laatste decennium is gedemocratiseerd. Ongehoord, niet gezien, in een hoek geduwd. Sociale media bieden een podium aan een bonte stoet gekwetsten ter linkerzijde, ter rechterzijde, van alle kleuren, van alle gezinten en formaten, van alle seksuele variaties. Velen voelen zich tekort gedaan. De een nog meer dan de ander. Leedconcurrentie alom. Alsof slachtofferschap het enige is waar onze gefragmenteerde samenleving nog respect voor kan opbrengen. De mens is de mens een wolf. Velen zijn gebeten. Maar de wond is geen medaille. Mensen zijn meer dan slachtoffer. Nelson Mandela heeft op verschillende plaatsen het nodige gezegd over slachtofferschap. Niet dat ik hem als een heilige te pas en te onpas wil citeren, maar op dit punt heeft hij recht van spreken. Geef het slachtoffer niet te veel ruimte. Let the victim erase nightmares by raising dreams. Ook dat schreef hij in de gevangenis. De gevangenis die zijn geest vleugels gaf. Beste mensen, laten we ons niet verschansen in onze schuttersputjes van zelfbeklag. Wijdse horizonnen wens ik u toe. Zo, dat was mijn praatje van dit jaar. Volgend jaar kom ik weer. Maar voor ik het toneel verlaat, wil ik graag de volgende spreker aankondigen. Een denker van formaat die verder durft te kijken, over wijdse horizonnen gesproken. Yvonne Adhiambo Owuor. Zij is een gelauwerd auteur uit Kenia, studeerde creative writing aan de Universiteit van Queensland, Australië. In 2003 won ze de Kane Prize for African Writing en het jaar erop werd ze in Kenia uitgeroepen tot The Woman of the Year in the Arts and Heritage category. In 2015 won ze de Jomo Kenyatta Prize for Literature. Onderwijl was ze ook nog 2 jaar executive director van het Internationale Filmfestival in Zanzibar. Op het ogenblik woont ze in Berlijn, waar ze met een werkbeurs schrijft aan haar 3e roman. Ik heet haar welkom in onze mudpuddle. Dames en heren, Yvonne Adhiambo Owuor.
As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison. Nelson Mandela. First, a good afternoon to everyone here, including those listening in. It is good to be back here in the country that was my first port of call to Europe so many years ago. I arrived in the winter to experience snow. It was also here that I learned that a river could die. I saw the sludge of a struggling river and felt so bereft that I wept before my new friends. The sensation turned me into a custodian of nature, aware that the things of life have their own yearnings, speak their life and trust that our humanity, also part of nature, can listen. Anyway, in subsequent years, the flush of first European wonderment gave way to a particular nonchalance. So I succumb with ease to a seduction by Germany, and in particular Berlin, a city that through unplanned fate has become the place from which I look at and into and through Europe. But given the rather odd European predilection to imagine that every African aspires to migrate and live here, I hasten to add that I'm a full-time Kenya and Africa resident and citizen, albeit one with nomadic blood and seared with curiosity about Earth's responses to questions associated with human existence. So I roam, I write, I watch humanity through the lenses of the senses, of story, of art and ideas. Europe is an inspirational palette for me. I wander through its places and spaces, struck by the paradoxes of its beauty and phantoms. I'm interested, as a pilgrim, in how people navigate their stories of ecstasy and horror. Europe has turned me into a ghost hunter, a ghost watcher, a spelunker, cave explorer, too. For I peer into its fissures to see what species of minotaur lurk beneath the shining surfaces. Second, today I stand behind a European podium to speak of things I said 2 years ago I wouldn't speak about in Europe again. My excuse is, family made me do it. My dear friend, Kenyan public thinker who lives here, Oyungapala, asked me to consider this gig after he had linked Bart and Lawrence to me, both of whom I now consider friends. Before long, I had wrapped myself in a cloak of yes. Third, I am grateful for the privilege of being able to speak under the mantle of the great sheltering ancestral tree, Nelson Mandela, and to do so in this moment in the history of our humanity. A question that is right for this day and time. Are you well? What a real challenge the recent years have been, haven't they? We are bonded and bound by a common story, a shared fate involving a clever and rude virus that does not conform to the rules of our illusions and delusions. COVID-19 has been an equal opportunity bastard. It has exposed our fractures and pretenses, even as it drives our world past our imagination of normal. It has been a time of uncertainty, of pain, and intimacy with death. Many, I am sure, are stirred to ask old questions anew. What does all this mean? What does it mean to be human now? What does it mean to live and die? Some of these thoughts make their way into this reflection. The future is a story we tell ourselves. The philosophical frames informing this exploration are taken from a few so-called margins. In it are anecdotes, rhetorical questions, historical allusions, and invocations of Mandela. Think of an idiomatic roaming along byways of moods and ideas, and I am your time-traveling tour guide. I gesture to aspects of our human landscape, pointing to stories behind the artifacts of time and a time in history. Boundaries between past, present, and futures are blurred in this trek. Think of Salvador Dali's persistence of memory as your disorienting landscape, just a little bit. I have two stories of encounters with Nelson to share with you. Nelson Mandela, I should say, none of which will find their way into history books. And if it weren't for this occasion, would have remained as whimsical memories. The first, I lived for a year in Cape Town, Claremont. I would walk from 5 a.m. from Claremont past Rosebank, where I attended film school. I loved the sense of the day's arrival, the dim but gentle light. Usually at that hour, there are very few people along the stretch of road. If we met, the most we ever did was nod and trudge on. The morning wind, echoing footsteps, the ghosts in the mind and thoughts of homework not done. In one of those days as I walked, I saw a slightly stooped, tall figure in front of me, walking at quite a fast pace. I hastened my steps to overtake him, just because I could. Hearing my footsteps, the form turned. When I drew parallel to him, it was a healthy elder in kind of the silhouette who said cheerily, "Good morning, girl." "Good morning, sir," I replied. At the back of my mind, I thought, I know that voice. It was dark, that's my excuse. We proceeded on our respective ways, but 7 to 10 minutes later, from behind the sound of running and heavy breathing, I turned to look, frowning. 3 tall, bulked men reflecting the Rainbow Nation, one of whom had this kind of hearing device in his ears, stood there. Before I could panic, another said in a thick Afrikaner accent, ma'am, please, have you seen the president?" This has to be one of the strangest questions a person can hear at dawn. "Seen the president?" I squeaked. The other 2 guys were looking anxiously left, round, around, and then the puzzle pieces fell into place. Of course. I knew the road and its detours well, including the one President Mandela most likely turned into to evade his frantic bodyguards. I stared into the questioner's eyes and said, "No." Off the 3 went, tearing past me, heading in the wrong direction. I like to think that was my brief contribution to Mandela's short walk to... The second is Claremont Mall, lazy Saturday afternoon, book browsing, walking out of the bookshop, head in the clouds. I bump into someone who eases me aside, a side glance, the face. Its eyes are kind, twinkly, and lovely. His smile's a very serene smile. I know the face, I think, but it's the eyes that strike me, their warmth, their tenderness, and knowing. I walk away and run into people, dashing into the shop, murmuring, "President Mandela, Nelson Mandela." Okay, don't judge me. I re-enter the shop to become one of a crowd of 30 souls, sticking out my hands to be greeted by a myth, a legend. There are probably 10,000 other I Met Mandela stories out there, intimate, personal, and even ordinary. When I told my siblings the stories of the encounters, in their exclamation was vicarious embarrassment. How could you not know who you were seeing? It was his ordinariness, I answered defensively. He was the most an idol of idols, except for his eyes. His eyes were gems. Years later, one learns that the art of ordinariness by extraordinary souls is very rare indeed. It comes mostly because of a person's intimacies with the fires of the forces of our existence, good, bad, and in between. It is the shape of one who wrestled with and learned to appease the ravaging monsters of our deepest darknesses. Preparing for this presentation recovered some of these experiences which I had put aside. The questions that troubled me then reemerged. How does a human being keep sane and grounded even after a close encounter with evil that had intended his annihilation? How does a human being cohabit with suffering and do so with grace and beauty? How does a human flourish amidst the debris that had been made of his world? How can a man familiar with egregious injustice still believe in human restoration? How does a human come to shape the future with wounded hands? In other words, how does a human being live free from within? I do refract some of these echoes in this presentation. Dear world, in the COVID-19 common story, as author Anna Badkin put it, or common story as Anna Badkin puts it, or common curse, as the painter Makoto Fujimura observes, our entanglement. For humanity, this might have been a story of the triumph of the human spirit, of global solidarity of the kind we see on Hollywood and on Asian films, where the world unites to overcome a shared existential catastrophe. But oh no. Instead, the pandemic has served as a barometer of our human follies, exposed venalities and banalities, our mediocrity and avarice. It underlined our distances, how we would give up meaningful intimacies, a touch, a hug, a farewell kiss. It serves as a canary down the mine shaft. It tells us that in truth, we do not have the wherewithal or intent to resolve any of our existential calamities. Not the viruses, not the wars, and certainly not the ecological and climate catastrophe. We have learned that in the face of life-threatening adversity, our governments are disordered, the systems we uphold cannot withstand the pressures of crisis, and the asset of human cooperation is surrendered to vampires who freely commodify anguish and turn it into a game of counting coins as the media outdo themselves in promoting inanities. Knowledge gets instrumentalized to support assorted power grabs, and interest groups, wisdom and critical thinking go amiss. Truth. What is truth? Asked Pontius Pilate. We see the world is populated by many Neros whose ambitions are to engage in a cacophonous fiddle fest while the planet burns. The one piece of good news is that there is a younger generation who, witnessing the failures with concern and disgust, now know not to leave the future in the hands of the elders. Other notes from the zeitgeist. a grand geopolitical pivot with a focus now on the Swahili, I had to put Swahili there, Indo-Pacific seas. A fin de siècle moment, one that is likely to propel Asia and the Middle East, and China in particular, to the top of the manufactured world dominance hierarchy. The useless asymmetrical war between the so-called global north and global south now comes to a head with an unanticipated plot twist, doesn't it? A now floundering northern realm with its instinct to generating enemies will, in denial of emerging realities, probably trot into yet another of their nasty tribal bloodletting that will be labeled World War. However, the zeitgeist, with its reset button tendencies, suggests, if historical patterns are consistent, that such a war will only hasten the collapse of an old order and anchor an emerging reality, preparing the page for the next chapter in our human world story. A Pandora box opening moment in our Earth. Strange physical and emotional curses flutter around our world, together with fragile hope for another kind of future being. Many are shattered in heart. The human flaw we deny can be wearing. Still, it is given to hope. Could we read this time as a teensy open window to squeeze through, to displace the archetypes of death and destruction that have drenched our time with tears and blood, caused nature so much grief that species have disappeared, and made the climate a rebel against our humanity? We stumble across shadowed thresholds, at being dragged across an unknown and other place-time space of beingness. What is certain is that there is no normal to return to. The future lives among and within us. A so-called fourth industrial technological revolution erupts around us. Artificial intelligence, fifth-generation telecommunications networking, quantum computing, the Internet of Things, humans as algorithm mindsets, hyper-war weapons, and machine-waged conflict creators. Humanity has been at this crossroads before, where technological forces meet an obsession with dominance combined with a sustained denial of the demons that haunt us. It led to unprecedented carnage before. What do we do then? How do we come to live? What names do we assign the landscape of the emerging future? Our present language is insufficient to contain our times. What would it take for us to imagine this future differently, and in a way speak to the service of our collective humanity? How do we create a language for our time and for our timeless longings? For we are in a phase where sameness of thought is sought and social media mob formations are permitted to sanction perceived opinion errors and to vilify even to death those who hold positions that don't conform to popular consensus. An old ghost has adapted itself to our time, the pathological fear of difference and divergence that then rewrites intolerance as justice. I worry. How will we approach the arena of possibilities as gladiators of ideas if we are terrified of oppositional perspectives that challenge our assumptions? If we lurk terrified about the risk of making mistakes? How then will we story the middle ground that could be a hearth from out of which another future might arise? 2 years ago, I gave a speech in response to a proposal to reflect on the history of Africa and Europe as a shared liaison. My presentation ended with an appeal inspired by Graham Greene's End of the Affairs request to God. Please leave us alone. It was a signal to myself mostly to detach from all these Africa in dialogue with Europe things. I'm still convinced that our entanglement under the current ideological setup with its built-in mechanisms for editing and gaslighting is irreparable. Most of everything that needed to be said about our tragic encounter with Europe in the long age of atrocity has been stated and reiterated for 500 years. A new ideological space, perhaps a complex, unless a new ideological space, perhaps a complex philosophy and psychohistorical theory of humanity has to be imagined. One that will incorporate a forensic study of the human moral structure, a theory that can deliver a muscular language that can host our human whys, our ghosts, our phantoms, our abysses, our hells, while dialoguing with these. Until that happens, I thought there is no point in our sustained blowing of hot air into one another's faces. We are good at echoing right-sounding phrases that tick the politically and socially correct boxes, yet hastily retreat from naming our unrequited ghosts. We would prefer to exorcise one another rather than evacuate our ghosts, right? As a human collective, we should have long ago critiqued and tried to gain insight into why and how a culture that wrapped itself in the elevated cloak of Christianity, that sublime Semitic offering to the earth, how such a culture would turn the grand and beautiful blueprint for loving and trusteeship with its stated rules for relating to others, to self, to earth and God, into a death cavalry carrying gluttonous, marauding, and murderous hordes. So many rapacious illegal immigrants across the world, a swarm of humans who would systematically, industrially, and diligently exterminate and destroy others, devastate nature, plunder the goods, wealth, and art of others, steal histories, steal stories, steal ideas, while projecting these as destined acts of salvation, mercy, civilization, and modernity. Manifest destiny, some would even proclaim, these horrid little priests of Baal. And then, in a gesture of psychic jiu-jitsu, they wrote over the slaughtered and inscribed the horror upon their victims, presenting them as the causes of their suffering. And they referred to those they preyed upon as savages, heathens, pagans, history and meaning-free wretches for whom their presence, those odious hordes, was philanthropy. As they surveyed the brokenness they had wrought, they informed themselves, as they often do today, but these are so used to suffering. They're so resilient. Nothing symbolizes this cultural pathology than the alleged migrant crisis, a convenient bogeyman upon which internal contradictions are projected. Migrant crisis? Shall we talk about how Canada, New Zealand, and the USA came into being? Shall we speak about the building of Brussels? How about the swarms of social development economic migrants in Africa? Some call them expatriates. That four missionary caste adorned in general with condescension, worthiness, and the fear of being found out by local immigration departments. Refuge seeking as a crime, while shedding torrents of crocodile tears about the fate of women and children, the same women and children who were being collaterally damaged in imprecise drone strikes, about which said politicians have had nothing to say. And now, without a blink of irony, the world must endure more tedious pronouncements about commitments to enforce and foster rule-based international order. But do I trust these fosterers of rule-based international order to exercise some of that worthiness to undertake at least one public commission of inquiry into the Himalaya mountains of crimes of war against humanity? Not to mention the benefits accrued from a lucrative violence economy with its sales of weapons of mass destruction. We, the rest, majority world actually, note the ways that not one of the self-described beacons of democracy, human rights, etc., has ever condemned Guantanamo Bay prison, the concentration camp that is a lesion on human conscience, into which even Uyghurs had been extraordinarily renditioned. We are each uniquely implicated in the deadly human collusion with us, with silences. The only innocents in this lunacy are the children of a new generation who will be compelled to inherit a long legacy of bullshit. I hope they turn it around and shove it into our faces, sincerely. Why would that new generation need to carry the demons we flee from in cowardice into their future? The past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became the truth. George Orwell in 1984. By the way, I read that 65% of the people here think highly of their ancestors' colonial expeditions. Those land-grabbing sprees and genocidal rampages, the disease-spreading and thievishness, they consider it, and I quote, civilizational. The word civilized has been much abused, hasn't it? Is it civilized to never ever account for the Armageddonian distribution of diseases, including syphilis, tuberculosis, gonorrhea, smallpox, measles, dengue fever, cholera, chickenpox, jiggers, and cockroaches to the world? Ethnic cleansing, mass defilement, plundering, and enslavement of humans in the name of profit, the industrialization and legalization of moral outrages, that is civilized? The willful dispossession of people, the annihilation of cultures, and extermination of civilization, shouldn't the loathsomeness of this depravity alone, the extinction of peoples, shouldn't this alone have caused the nations involved to pause at least once a year in a gesture of reflection and remorse? That the deeds of serial murderers like Jean Peterson Cohen are whitewashed says more about the moral character and ethical orientation of a people than it does Mr. Cohen. One imagines that such a society should have long ago reflected on how and why a Mr. Cohen was formed as a homicidal ass, rather than raising him as an icon of service to the realm. The magnitude of damage to the worlds created by these rapacious, inhuman hordes are such that we have ascribed no proper name to that awful age. Colonialism and imperialism are euphemisms for a profound, parasitic, spiritual, and moral disorder that defies the dignified human imagination. The lack of language to enter into the stark labyrinth leads to an instinct by an offending culture to project pathologies upon others. It acts right back to an intrinsic excuse-making mechanism organized to project internal disorders and their ghosts. We, the rest, the majority world, see how a veneer of civility dissolves when given 0.008 of a chance. The unresolved instinct for a blood hunt needs an outlet. Remember what happened when the Botswana and South Africans announced the isolation of the Omicron variant. Frenzied travel bans against most African nations, and no old, nasty, debilitating primordial trope was left unused by the global media. Not one. We see this. We nod as the episodes unfold. We tell ourselves in our many languages, the demon is on the prowl again. Listen to how it growls at us. Is this the type of soul burden we want to bequeath the next generation? How do we tackle both our haunted selves and timelines? What are we to do, co-humans? The current state of things cannot endure. Actually, anyway, with the ascendance of China and the move towards multipolarism, a change is likely to happen anyway. But since we have a stake in dreams of a new life, shouldn't we try to clear the metaphorical air right now? Or do we intend to kick the stinking can into the hands of yet another generation? Please leave us alone. I had wanted to extricate myself and others who feel as I do from what our dear Frantz Fanon referred to as European thought's permanent dialogue with itself, an increasingly obnoxious narcissism. I imagined that the door past the tedium was labeled avoidance. I hope to spend my future time and energy on working on other stories and conjuring other worlds with, for, and among my people. However, this special call to reflect on the meaning of Nelson Mandela led to a very unexpected place, a sense of being told to go deeper, a reinfusion of energy into the artist's call. Do not exile yourself from others. Do not shield the ones you cherish from the reality of the darkness. Do not ever walk away from the heart of another human being. Seek out what is human through whatever wounds present themselves, however much these might induce suffering. Dare, as the unfortunately maligned late French lawyer Jacques Vergès once did, to insist on, find, seize, and drag out what remains human from the intricate and sticky clasp of evil, to dive into the abyss, to retrieve that which remains human, even when it is camouflaged by ghosts and demons, and defend this humanity assiduously to ensure that evil can never and will never have the last word about what it means for us to be human. When we dehumanize and demonize our opponents, we abandon the possibility of peacefully resolving our differences and seek to justify violence against them. Nelson Mandela. I see this as an epic, mythic, and existential adventure to confront an ancient cosmic chaos that disfigures our human wholeness. It is a hero-making, the pained kind of heroism that might lead to death. But it is worthwhile for humanity, don't you think? Going to war with the forces running amok in our humanity, forces, mind you, invited into our lives, our earth, by fellow human beings. Engaging this might reshape the map of human futures, proposing one that is far more beautiful, good, and true. To this goal, might we dare to ask again as individuals and a collective, after everything has been done, after everything done and not done, could we dare to hope to ask, what does it mean for us to be human here and now? What does the humanity of the other mean to and for us here and now? I discern the call to a battleground that seduces and repulses me. If kinder horizons beckon, however, they do so from the fray, through the valley and hole of death, through which a humanity that aches for light and lightness must traverse. Into the depth, therefore, I must go, into the crime scene of our suffering, our crime scene, and work from there. It is a summons, our defiant trust. I must trust that the forces of goodness, beauty, and truth will rally to work with our humanity to overcome its fears and lunacies. The limitless powers of a collective imagination can stretch the boundaries of possibility, thought, ideas, and language to catapult our Earth into destination future. Also, I ought to stop calling those venal ancestors marauding hordes. They are human beings too, even if I must grit my teeth to say it. Think future. What words in other languages do you have for future? With a feeling of that word, what do you imagine? What do you yearn for? Me? I yearn for lion hearts that can first reinstate and then search their consciences, to leave familiar echo chambers and venture into the rooms where our atrocity projects are hidden. I wonder if we could find the guts to enter into the labyrinths of our unresolved historical horrors that trap the minotaurs within, to visit our monsters and learn how to calm them down. What the heart-rending public lynching of George Floyd revealed on May 25th, 2020, was also that humanity's unresolved ghosts, no matter how long they are buried underground, will erupt, and they have the power to set the sites of their wounds alight. Our phantoms have no expiry dates. Do I hold the present Occidental generations morally responsible for the phantoms their ancestors unleashed across the world? I don't need to. They are marked by it anyway, even when the parents try to take away the books with the stories of old darknesses out of circulation. Each generation inherits their portion of unrequited ghosts. The resonances of unresolved pasts mark us all. People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. James Baldwin. Do we, as a human collective, know what we ought to do? Naturally. We hold the Nazis and their unfortunate descendants accountable for similar or lesser crimes committed in Europe to this day. We have approved legions of justice seekers traversing the world looking for and returning Nazi-plundered wealth and art. The beneficiaries of perpetrators of that season of insanity, even if they are in their twilight years, are still seized, hauled to court, prosecuted, and jailed. We recognize the inheritance of Holocaust wounds, but when other people cry out about the roiling of long, catastrophic resonances of truly atrocious colonial past, they are urged to move on, to leave the past behind, and to stop making excuses, to focus on development. But tell me, how do we move on when life is a continuum? How do we move on? Because we do need to, actually. It is true for the sake of a new generation. But how do we move on and leave the ghosts behind? With silence? Amnesia? Anesthesia? I once visited the DRC. I met the forms and shapes of textured, unrequited silence there. They leak into the passing human soul. Almost 100 years later, within the glorious music of the Congo, Leopold II, his gross legacy, the haunting horror of an institutionalized butchering of more than 10 million unmemorialized souls still resound. The world offers memorials for atrocity that still shudder the human soul, but for this great abomination, only silence. Not even a mock trial. I do not attribute the gaps to racism. That is a fig leaf. There is something far more cowardly, hideous, and malevolent at play, and it needs its own definition. Such silences interest me, this pause between worlds. I said worlds, not words, because they are not empty spaces. These are haunted spaces, these silences. I have wondered, after all the anthems of righteousness following the Second World War victories, why was it such a struggle to apply similar tenets of justice to the so-called colonies? Why did the excesses and abuses continue among the cultures that stood on podiums of triumph, preaching liberation, democracy, and the triumph of good over bad? Post-war atrocities committed by so-called allies in Indonesia, for example, have those ever been prosecuted? It would be fearful if this moral and spiritual disorder were to enter our human future unexamined. But who will do the arduous work of such an examination? Who has studied why a culture so easily gave up the heirloom of our shared humanity to forces of deviant chaos? In exchange for what? Ceaseless human blood sacrifices in games of violence and brutality? For wealth, power, dominance, and control? For the institutionalization of fake news, the replacement of truth and meaning with propaganda? We are now at the edge of staring into an existential abyss. Was it worth it? By the way, are you here, the children of a new generation? Talking to Baba, the under 40s, are you here, some of you? Yes. Tell me, are you willing and resigned to inheriting a legacy of homegrown and tended ghosts that we, your elders, have refused to reckon with? Are you? Is this just to you? Is this fair to you? Is this right to you? 2 years ago, in an informal conversation with the meaning of the Humboldt Foundation Museum in Berlin, one of the fine thinkers in the audience, a German professor who had mulled over history for most of his life, cried out in reaction to my own anguished response, his voice breaking, his hands wiping his tears. "But what more can we do? What do you want? How can we ever fix this?" I suddenly cried, startled by a dialogue of tears, a human response to recognize a truthfully broken heart. The causes of the cracks might differ, but there is no argument against an exposed human heart. Moreover, which human desires another to wallow in guilt? That would be selfish. Guilt does not delete the past. Guilt found in others is a finger pointing on the hand, wherefore point right back. And the thumb gestures as a witness to the heavens. So what do we do? What can we do? I read a line from our venerable ancestor, Nelson Mandela, the line that precipitated a crisis of my own imagination. He says, "Forgiveness liberates the soul." He said, "It removes fear. That is why it is such a powerful weapon." I argued in my heart, is this even viable for our humanity today? Why would we seek this when we need revenge? What's the point? He says, "It's so easy to break down and destroy. The heroes are those who make peace and build." I don't care to be a hero. I do, however, want so badly to be a human being fully alive, living free from within and without. Free from fear as he was. I want to meet fate on the road to somewhere with a twinkle in my eye. Is that destination via the road of forgiveness? What a damn frontier to cross, strewn with thorns and obstacles and navigated in humility. Is forgiveness possible without justice? But then again, human justice is so woefully inadequate, it never satisfies. How are we then to rehumanize our humanity and its history, at least for the sake of the children to come? From then on, the reply seemed to hold at this insurmountable wall: forgiveness. Unconditional forgiveness at that, meaning that anything that comes after it, a trial or a truth, justice, and atonement commission, for example, are a bonus. Yet how would our humanity invest in such an arduous undertaking in a world where Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, My Lai, Tantura, Vietnam are shorthand for the vilest of human shadows that implicate our dignity, that amplify all our silences, hypocrisy, amnesia, and the selective application of justice? But what if? What if our humanity summoned a large enough imagination to embark on a global quest, in a quest for forgiveness with the same zeal that it has used to destroy worlds, cultures, civilizations, and peoples? Here is an observation. The afflicted most desire to be seen, heard, acknowledged, to have their sorrow witnessed to mourn in community, to face the offender or the offender's people or the institutions that are custodians of a collective will, to grieve together, and through this, enter a place of timelessness where the offending party can safely accuse themselves of willful sorrow, pain, and anguish-making, offer a sense of remorse, and express a desire to atone, a longing to be forgiven without expecting that forgiveness will be tendered. To wait for the time when both sides of the wounds are ready to be touched, stroked, known, soothed. To wait. About the force of forgiveness, don't dare think that forgiveness is made out of spoken words alone. Forgiveness is a wrestling match with eternity. It is seized from the mouth of the Minotaur in our labyrinths of our deepest secrets. It leaves battle scars. Yet, if that grail pierces our urgent exchanges, perhaps then the debilitating guilt, the shame, the accusations may finally be laid to rest, supported naturally by gestures of repair and atonement. Such courage, one imagines, might reveal, perhaps, new pathways of being and belonging for a new generation, for a reinvigorated and rehumanized people. If I hear the call to rehumanization, then I need to descend to the metaphorical hells that haunt our living. And when I do, as you might, I will find something of my own face looking back at me. When I howl into it, as you might, I will hear echoes of my voice returning to me. For as the gifted Roman of African descent, Publius Terentius Afer observed so long ago in his play, I am human, and I think nothing human is alien to me. If we understand this, then of what are we still afraid? Might we have the imagination to offer ourselves the space to express our pent-up need to acknowledge our offenses and wounds together? In the tragic history of our entangled worlds and world encounters, the betrayal of hospitality, we lost worlds, we lost souls, we lost dignity, and we also lost one another. We evade the cosmic press of the pain and the anguish through anemic, shallow, narrow, idiotic lexicon that reduces our complexities and breadth into a contest between puerile binaries, developing, developed, primitive, civilized, scientific, traditional, us, them, democratic, autocratic, black, white, victim, perpetrator, worthy, unworthy. Are we to extend this stupidity to another age? To call to the future is also a call to a lexicon. There is no adequate answer to the German professor's questions, but what I know is that we cannot keep generation after generation fleeing from the questions, from the suffering, from the unknown, from each other, from the scars. Somehow we need to find a way to summon a blueprint for the bridges and corridors into our deep human re-encountering, past our battles, past our hatreds, past our vitriol. Why wouldn't we want to retrieve a love for and of humanity in the lexicon of simple truth, of beauty, and of words with substance? But let me poke at two hemorrhaging human wounds, shall we? The first is the state of the climate and nature's rebellion. First, I maintain that our climate catastrophe is a mirror of our moral crisis. It is not something that mechanical proposals or the Ponzi scheme of carbon sequestration can fix. Our environmental catastrophe is entwined with greed and the language of economic ideologies that relentlessly eviscerate the earth. The primary site of horror is the human conscience. The most polluted place on earth is not Everest, but the human will, that knows what it must do, but refuses to do it unless it makes a profit. Our ancestors warned the marauding hordes, the visiting ancestors, the visiting villainous ancestors, that the earth would come to this. Our ancestors were then called uninformed savages. To compound the insult without reflection or irony, descendants from the main offending culture now boldly parade their pale children, their daughters before us, as prophetic presences, mandated to lecture us on the deep themes our many people had articulated and pleaded about so many years ago. Here is a suggestion served cold. The gluttonous and rapacious imagination that so horribly injured our planet should, A, reflect on its conscience and its own responsibility for the destruction, B, apologize to the rest of humanity, to nature and the generations to come, C, get on with specific and practical deeds of repairing the earth, stop pontificating and scientifying things that we already know about. We replenish and restore ancient animal corridors and return local bears, deer, wolves, foxes their right to natural and safe passages. For planetary anguish generated solely, uniquely, and entirely by hubris, humility is the only antidote. If real-world voices imbued with lived wisdom are sought, voices with authority and agencies through practice, when humanity decides that it really wants to remember what to do to repair our shattered relationship with the cosmos and nature, I propose that, among other things, we seek out the still living, weathered custodians like our Oloiboni Kitok Mokompo Olesimel. I have his contact for those who want it. Souls who have remained in close dialogue with the earth and can translate its yearnings, whose strength against the ghastly parasitic tides have protected the life of a 1,000-plus-year-old pristine forest, its surrounding hills and plains where humans still coexist with even large animals as a part of an intricate web of being. The second wound I want to speak about is that of the primordial caste system of invented pigmentation hierarchies, as my young friend, Kenyan thinker Darius Okola phrases it. A pox that reduces our complex human identity, essence, history, experience to skin tone identification, that has institutionalized the evil of the willful rejection of our sacred humanity and its intrinsic dignity of the many. Pigmentation as identity. The condensation of evil. We understand evil to be banal, but do not say enough about its stupidity. Science has a lot to answer for, by the way. And what a long, needless tragedy this wound has generated. The sorrow of the diminution of humanity, a race that prefers to seek alliances with likely aliens before repairing the shredded human relationship web that inhabits our Earth. Aliens? Looking outward for signs of aliens when the alien stares back at us from the mirrors with our faces? But where are you really from? I was told even those who are sixth-generation citizens of other skin tones here are still passively aggressed by indigenous tribalists. To those thus afflicted, I offer you this reply. Tell them, say, I come from the future. And now skin tone politics reemerges as a meaning-eating demon that has pivoted its gaze on the descendants of its originators, who in increasing spaces are expected to explain and defend themselves against presumptions of supremacy and privilege. Yeah, it's not fair. It should indeed have been obvious that tribalism, for that is all it is, always returns home to feast with its own. A quick detour for those in this tour group. I address those who have lived with a particular inheritance of sorrow, of struggle and anger, at the long resonance of profound existential injustice and linked to its gaslighting. Our quiet rage, pain, sorrow, suffering, trauma, and anger, our presences. We live in silent mourning for immense spiritual losses. The aesthetic obliteration that targeted our essence, the plunder of beauty, so senses cultivated through the ages were called into doubt and then judged by the thieves according to prosaic standards. Mediocre because they were self-referential, yet convinced then, as often now, that it is still the apex, the summum bonum. The tremendous sweeps of our ancestors' historical lives, their potent achievements, have been so pettily erased. So relentless, this epistemic, image, artistic, and a narrative removal. We are put on defense footing, so much so that the mighty work of raising and claiming our dead, their memories and ours, has been deferred for far too long. On our roads to imagined rehumanization and to each other, we may craft a path through the valleys of our sorrows and confront and name our ghosts. We need to wrestle with them, grieve their lives with them, turn them into the stories that are the source of power that will fuel our future. To be human is to be imbued with the power of co-creation, We are custodians of a grace that can refine and remake the world. Ours is an historical summons to painting with a quiet, resplendent light pouring through our distinct brokenness. Resurrection is also an act of will, you see. Beneath the quagmire of evil, the toxicity, the shadows, we need to salvage a love for, of, and to ourselves, our kin, our earth, our humanity, including those who present themselves as our foes. It means finding the strength to ask ourselves again and again, who are we? What does it mean for us to be human? Love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself. Sit, feast on your life. Derek Walcott. How do we then salvage a lexicon that has the strength to shelter our aggrieved ancestors, our aggrieved selves, our aggrieved wounds, and also to shelter the horror of all our cosmic losses? How do we learn to die to that which was once dreamt of, trusting that in the many tombs of our repose, we might be reborn, liberated from a cult that would make us perpetual victims, scapegoats, and aliens to our earth? To that long war on our essences, we have never responded in kind, and we could. We too could seize and take a hold of and rewrite others' stories, images, undermine their myths, and redefine their humanity. We could, but it will not serve our future, nor the worlds we carry inside us. We need to show up in array, not as the projected monster. That is not our story, but as the super presences that our cultures and conscience saw and sought to crush. By presence alone, we might affirm a dazzling truth. We are still here. We are the legion that walked through the valley of the shadow of death. We are the flowers that grew in adversity. We are indeed the most beautiful. Because of this, there has never been a better time to intentionally plot to unleash the most beautiful and fettered, best, bravest, and brightest imaginings for ourselves, for our children, for the earth and the galaxies. Dream. What would it take to call into being not just a culture or a civilization, but a new humanity? It is said that deep wounds reveal deep yearnings. Then those are the places through which the suns will shine through. In that light infused with our blood and grief, what do the landscapes of our longing look like? Tell me a story of our desire. Our wounds are not marks of Cain, but the scars of great war veterans, of the still, damn it, still alive. Please don't mistake this proposition as a suggestion to gloss over the unresolved past. It is about ghost busting. A will to turn the phantoms into geothermal force, to harness for power and for fuel, and a will that swears on the graves of all our dead, our lost and missing, in the name of generations to come, that never again, never ever again will we, a people inscribed with the color of the soil, never again will we allow others to turn us into their playthings, their dumping site, their scapegoats. And to make that vow become the flame in our eyes when we meet to rebuild the earth. End of diversion. What might it be like to know that trust is in the heart of the sites of our future human encountering? Could a generation take up that ceaseless task of repairing and restoring our humanity, our nature, our cosmos, ourselves? It would have to be a multi-generational cathedral project, a notion proposed by the late Stephen Hawking, a multi-generational undertaking by human beings in the service of the highest ideals, with inner and outer eyes fixed upon the earth and eternity. A multifaceted undertaking with no end date, which aspires to transcendence, to touching eternity with love. And it is served by the human yearning for meaning, for beauty, for goodness and truth. In my infrequent writing intensive, I explore with participants the energies that undergird the motives in and of character development, of story and journey, fear and desire. Fear is very easy to explore and discuss. It is desire that sparks an emotional crisis. What do you desire? I remind participants that desire is not the same as need or want. Desiderare, that which the stars hold for us. It is written in the skies. So, what do you desire? Take your time. It's a most vital question. If you're struggling tonight, look up into the skies, past clouds, and find and ask your star. Look for a long, long time. That which presses your body to the ground does not and should not become you. We have access to the infinite realm of the imagination as individuals and as a collective. Our dear Frantz Fanon foresaw this time. Long ago, he invited us to imagine a new history of humanity that gestured to the highest of values and ideals in order to counter the miasma from an age of atrocity and embark on the journey of the rehumanization of the earth. We ache for a life-giving story of humanity, don't we? Humanity dreams, thinks, speaks in story. We read story, we see in story, we live out the stories we come to believe are the world. We navigate the world in stories. Stories we are told, stories we believe, stories that are told about us. The future is a story we tell ourselves. It is a construct, a story that is imagined and imaged, plotted, designed, and then resources deployed so that it can be made real. And future does not mean ignoring the past or history. Don't worry. The past and future, the past and the present are both the past and future are both resident in the present. So, what are the first sentences in the story of your desire? Do they fulfill a human ideal? Are they moral, good, true, and beautiful? Do they give life? Are they just? What is the symbol and image of your first sentence? Later, try to find another human being and compare first sentences. Put this together. What do they promise? Imagine what we might unleash into the world if these were transformed into reality. Imagine the world then. A quick note as I approach the end. I am moved by a new emerging generation, a transcultural, transboundary race whom I stalk or stan in their parlance. They easily develop new ecologies of opportunities, employing whichever forces present themselves. They question the received knowledge. They're cynical about previous assumptions. They wield the forces of social media to reimagine their world. I'm a beneficiary of such imaginings as a member of a WhatsApp, Facebook, and Instagram group dedicated to followers of Korean and Chinese drama and music. 2 Kenyan women set this up, and they have over 2,000 members from all over the world. Many are fluent in written and spoken Korean and Mandarin. And they represent a generation that have moved beyond mere rainbow nationing to become vanguards of a future that is already here. A community of spirits that the old paradigms, the old wineskins can neither describe, define, or contain. They are the antidote, I think, to an age of smoke, death, and mirrors, and a commensurate nothingness that culminates now in a couple of Peter Pan boys riding phallus-shaped rockets into almost outer space. But don't worry, the children who will bring down these life-squandering grifters have already been born. We approach the end of our excursion. Let me leave you with a souvenir of a first sentence that excites me with hope, that makes me afraid, because in the life of one human being whose life epitomizes both life's wounds and will to transcendence, it has proven to be true and good and beautiful. No human is limited. Imagine that. And so we end this presentation here, thanking you for your time and attention, right where we started, before the echoes of our venerable ancestors' voice. I leave you with his words.
tenkosi tenkosi leya makhosa kwaZulu wentona hey wentona 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 ethi yempe yayisehlangene ngalena wentaba yempe yayisehlangene ngalena wentaba
Ngithi South Africa, South Africa, we love you, our beautiful land. Ngithi South Africa, South Africa, we love you, our beautiful land.
siyazikhwenya shumawe South Africa siyazithemba sijabule sigcwele intokozo thina siyazikhwenya shumawe South Africa siyazithemba sijabule sigcwele intokozo Sing bam bam salale bam bam agana mata wo satana bam bam salale bam bam agana mata wo satana agana mata ngela agana wa mata satana agana mata ngela agana wa mata satana bam bam salale bam bam agana mata
Early morning we were on the street. It was winter, mid of January. Angelina, she was on her feet. Say to hell with the academy, let it loose. It's the revolution blues. Let it loose.